Shonen anime, especially the big shonen battle anime, have always been very popular. One after the other, at least one of them always seems to dominate the mainstream market at any time. Of course, we had the Jujutsu Kaisen craze that happened a couple years ago, and then there was a Chainsaw Man fad. More recently, we finished Demon Slayer Season 3, and now we're starting Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2. And well, while I'm not calling any of these anime bad, I mean, they definitely got popular for a reason, I just can't seem to get excited for them anymore. Trust me, there was a time when I waited with bated breath week after week for yet another My Hero episode or Demon Slayer episode, but that time seems to have passed. And well, there are a couple of reasons, some you might expect, some you might not. Keep watching it to see if you agree with any of them. Now before we start this, I want you to think of a modern day shonen of your choice. It can be My Hero, it can be Chainsaw Man, doesn't matter. Now I want you to think of the most memorable moments there for you. You got it? I'm willing to bet that 9 times out of 10, you would have thought of a fight scene. Now try to remember what came just before that. For example, if you've thought of the iconic All Might vs All for One scene, try to remember what led to the two of them facing each other again. If you're thinking about the final fight in Jujutsu Kaisen, try to think about what caused the protagonist to be there in the first place. If you're anything like me, you're either going to need some time to think about it, or just completely forgot. Or better yet, even if you do remember, it's possible that you might realize what happened before isn't even that important to the story. That's the first quote-unquote issue I have with shonen nowadays. I definitely feel like this about some shows more than others, but I feel like the format for shonen nowadays is just one fight scene leading into yet another fight scene. Instead of feeling like it's one complete story that I'm sitting and watching through, it feels more like I'm watching separate clips of fight animations that just happen to be set in the same universe. My theory as to why they're doing this is that they're adapting to the younger audience, as their attention spans get shorter and shorter, so they'll have to keep on putting flashy stuff on screen in order to retain their audience's attention. And well, even as a Gen Z myself, I gotta say, I'm just not into that anymore. Back when people were still going crazy for Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1, I had heard about all this talk about how it's peak shonen, how Itadori is the new GOAT or whatever, and after a lot of contemplating, I finally caved in to see what it's all about. Since this show is apparently so good, I gave it the proper respect and binged all 24 episodes in a single session, so as to not let my emotions die down between the episodes. And hey, I said at the very beginning, this show's pretty good. These fight scenes go pretty goddamn hard. When I was finally done, however, I was left in a very peculiar emotional state. I didn't feel like it was bad, not at all the fight scenes were generally amazing, but I didn't really feel all that hyped up or excited for the show as a whole either. I was just filled with this overwhelming sensation of mid. I know me associating JJK with the word mid already has JJK fans foaming at their mouths, but that is how I felt. And since I'm pissing off one fandom, I might as well piss off the other too. Believe it or not, that's largely how I felt about Chainsaw Man too, and I followed that show as it was coming out. Again, if you ask me whether the individual moments are bad, I tell you, no, of course not. The quality in these fight scenes has just kept going up. But I can only take so many individual, separated doses of hype before I get tired of it. It's like pounding back shot after shot of hard liquor one after the other. The first few ones will give you that kick you're looking for, but that sensation doesn't last. After taking a shot, before long, you're gonna want another shot again. You'll slowly get used to it, and you'll slowly become number to it. Eventually, you'll have to deal with the hangover. And for me, that hangover moment was the immense feeling of mid that I felt after binging every episode of JJK. In contrast, that's why I love Mushoku Tensei that much. The individual fight scenes are still crazy good, but the story also goes deep into the moments between those fight scenes, not only deeply illustrating the protagonists at their peak, but also going into detail when our protagonists are simply going through life. Fights rarely happen just because, they happen as a result of the story, or rather, as a result of the characters' actions. When I think back on Mushoku Tensei's story, I don't just remember the beautifully animated fights, I can roughly think of Rudeus' whole journey, because they focus on Rudeus' growth as a character instead of the fight scenes, and everything in the story is written for that focus. I'm not pounding back shots here, it's like I'm having a nice glass of wine, where the aftertaste of each sip is just as important as the sip itself. Because of that, I don't need to keep going after the next mouthful of alcohol for stimulation, and so I won't slowly grow numb to what it has to offer. And guess what? You won't get a hangover from sipping a glass of wine. And well, the feeling I felt after watching Mushoku Tensei was anything but mid. I would go into further detail as to why I love Mushoku Tensei's story-driven nature, but I already did so in my previous video about the first episode of Season 2 and why I loved it. So go check that video out after this one to know more about why I love Mushoku Tensei for this. But of course, there are more reasons other than that for me to not care about shonens anymore. The next one is what I like to call the intangible final boss. The idea of introducing the final boss in the story right as it starts is inherently not a bad idea. It lets you know what the protagonists are working towards and creates intrigue as to how our weak protagonist at the start of the story is going to grow into someone that can take on that final boss. Despite me clowning on Demon Slayer every once in a while, I think that show does this quite well. Muzan gets to be on screen every once in a while, and we get to see his character and powers in action. His demonic powers are terrifyingly distant from that of our human protagonists, but we know it should technically be possible for them to do it at some point, since there apparently has already been a human that was able to do it before. The second part there is where the problem is for other shows. The final boss is not properly grounded. Take Chainsaw Man for example. It has been revealed to us that the Gun Devil is our final boss. It has committed what is essentially genocide, and the protagonists need to defeat it in order to prevent any more deaths at its hand. The problem is, with what we're shown, the power of the Gun Devil is so great that we can't even start to fathom how the protagonists are going to kill it. The thing has leveled cities in under 5 minutes, and somehow this little guy with chainsaws is going to kill it? That is just way too distant and intangible that nothing that's happening in the story right now feels relevant. In Demon Slayer, at least the demons Tanjiro fights also have supernatural powers like Muzan, so as he fights these demons, it does feel like he's training to fight Muzan and inching closer and closer after every fight. But in Chainsaw Man, the most significant training Denji got was from fighting this human-sized devil hunter. Sure, he's strong, but I just can't help but feel like training against a humanoid is gonna help much when you need to fight something that killed 1.2 million people with one attack. It makes me feel like I just watched 12 episodes of anime that amounted to barely anything in the grand scheme of things. An easy way to fix this would be to establish relevant goals in between the very beginning and the final boss, making it feel like a step-by-step process to reach the final boss. Again, Demon Slayer does this in a simple but effective way. They created 12 extra villains and assigned them from strongest to weakest with either upper or lower rank and a number. They did kill off 4 of them in one scene, but having 8 other villains is still not bad. It allows Tanjiro to climb up the ladder in skill by fighting them one by one, and it would leave little ambiguity as to how much stronger he actually got, since the power level of the demon would easily be comparable to the ones he previously fought. On top of that, Tanjiro has an extra incentive to fight these demons, since he needs their blood for Nezuko's treatment. That's why I'm originally quite invested in Demon Slayer. Even though killing Muzan seems completely impossible for Tanjiro, with each of the 12 moons he defeats, we can feel him inch closer and closer to Muzan's power level, and that kept me really attached to the story. That's why it's such a shame to me that they messed up the power scaling during the Swordsmith Village arc. But that's a completely different problem that Demon Slayer has, so you can choose to go watch my video on that if you're interested. Now don't get me wrong, I'm sure Chainsaw Man is going to pop off when it gets its next season, since they're going to start going for the Gun Devil now. But all I'm saying is, just collecting the little pieces of his flesh during the season and having the final fight be against someone that doesn't nearly represent the Gun Devil's power doesn't help at all with my investment in the show. This is probably going to be my most controversial opinion of the video, since I can totally see the argument that having the protagonist start small against an impossible foe is exactly what gets people interested. Trust me, I can totally understand that point of view, but from my experience, sometimes the protagonist just starts so small that in order for them to not get killed off immediately, the final boss has to work in the shadows for some inexplicable reason and barely show up at all. And if you're not even going to showcase the villain's character from time to time like in Demon Slayer for us to get attached to them, why even tell us about the final boss? Wouldn't it work better if it was a mystery and we had to figure out who's pulling the strings behind all this? that would be intriguing, and every step would feel significant, since even the smallest amount of knowledge and info would count as progress towards the final goal of figuring out who's the mastermind. But once you reveal that final villain, I just feel like anything that's not progressing towards that is a waste of time. It becomes hard for me to get attached to the plot because it feels like they are doing a lot of things that barely contribute towards their ultimate goal. Before you go hating on me though, note that this isn't exactly an argument saying why your favorite shonen sucks. After all, that's not what the video is about, is it? I did my best to put a pretty intangible feeling into words, and honestly, I don't think I did a good enough job for this last point. So feel free to go off in the comments and tell me why you might disagree. Who knows, it could help me make clear of this feeling I have towards shonen and their final bosses. What I'm going to talk about next, however, is a pretty tangible feeling, and that is my frustration towards how studios will drag the stories out as much as possible in order to squeeze as much money out of the franchise as possible. I'll be honest though, this point is 90% attributed to Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2, which is the prequel to the first season. While I did say a while ago that I found Jujutsu Kaisen to be mid, it's not like I had zero interest in seeing how it's gonna play out. The power system is well explained, and it was fun to imagine what abilities Itadori is gonna get in the future. So, I thought to myself, if a season 2 comes out, I'll watch it, with cautious optimism. But guess what? Not only did they first release a prequel as an anime movie, something I'm quite traumatized by because of Beyond the Boundary, they then proceeded to launch Season 2 also in the form of a prequel, going even further back in time than the movie did. Now I'm sorry, but are we really serious about this? I can tolerate one prequel right after the first season, but really? 2? I am of the opinion that prequels are just fundamentally inferior to the other types of storytelling, because you have to tiptoe around what's already been established so that not all tension is lost to someone saying, oh, the protag has to win here. He showed up in the last season after all. Honestly though, I think Jujutsu Kaisen 0 was fine for what it was. It remedied the problem I just mentioned by having the protagonist be a character that never really showed up in the first season. So for most of us, who didn't have a laser focus on what was mentioned in Season 1, we basically didn't know who this guy is. And so when it seemed like he offered up his life to defeat the bad guy, we felt genuine tension because we could actually imagine him dying for it. But of course, they had to overdo it and have the next season be another prequel that takes place even further in the past. Look, I really don't feel like a prequel story about young Geto and Gojo was necessary at all. The mysterious nature worked for both of them. We were already invested in their characters without knowing that much about them, because we were fed breadcrumbs of information about the characters bit by bit, and knowing that they used to be friends from the movie was enough to really pique our interest. It would have been perfectly fine if they had just kept feeding us the breadcrumbs, but nope, they decided to drop a whole backstory on us. And as I expected, they fell into that trap I mentioned earlier. To talk about that trap, I'm going to have to spoil some pretty major moments in Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2. If you don't want spoilers for that, go to this timestamp to skip it. Because they decided to make a sequel surrounding the characters that are super relevant to the main story, they failed to produce any tension for what should have been a pretty big moment. I didn't feel intrigue or interest when Toji started to fight Gojo and Geto, because I know for a fact they both survive. Because I know for sure these two can't die, I felt no tension when Gojo was apparently killed. He has to come back for him to appear later in the chronology. And knowing Gojo, the guy that can literally manipulate space-time, he's going to pull some crazy BS to survive this. As a result, I didn't enjoy his revival either, because it was super freaking predictable. With how they presented it, I think they expected me to go, oh my god, he's back! But in reality, all I said was, there he is. I just couldn't get excited about it at all. I will give them this though, Amanai's abrupt death was pretty chilling. We did only get to know her for 3 episodes, but I can't say that scene wasn't at least effective in bringing out some emotions from the audience. That was a pretty long side tangent on why I don't like prequels, but if we are to bring it back to the main point, having prequels drags out the story, and if the backstory really wasn't necessary, it just causes me to lose interest in the main plot. In this case, they spent 24 episodes to get us attached to Itadori and the gang, only to not have them included in the next 2 installations in the series. how the hell am I supposed to stay attached to the main plot? I sure as hell am not going to get myself attached to season 2 because I already know the rough outcome between Gojo and Geto. Given that Geto is a villain in the main plot, Geto is going to turn evil at some point in the season and fight against Gojo. That's not a spoiler, that's just how it has to turn out. Whatever interest I had in Jujutsu Kaisen has now diminished simply due to the time that has passed since season 1. That doesn't mean I mind them taking their time with the sequel, I'm just disappointed that they decided to put their time towards an unnecessary prequel, even after already having put out a prequel. Anime studios and or writers of shonen stories? Please, just tell the story as it is and not drag it out unnecessarily. Hey, so I wrote this script before episode 5 of season 2 came out, and it seems like we are going to go back to the present day after this episode. So it's a bit of a relief that this whole season wouldn't be a prequel. But I think my point still stands. I still don't think it's necessary to have another prequel story happen right after the prequel movie, and I still think prequels are just generally less exciting, or at least harder to make exciting. It might only be 5 episodes, but that's still 5 more lackluster episodes of shonen to me. Anyway, let's move on to the conclusion of the video now. Having said all that, I'm not going to be delusional and tell you that I won't keep following the series that I've already committed to. That ship has already sailed, and I might as well see how it plays out. I'm willing to give them the chance to turn it around. But as the title suggests, I'm just not going to be excited for shonen anymore. I really don't care anymore when people bring up yet another new shonen and hype it up as the next peak anime. It will probably take me months after a new popular series drops for me to finally watch it. And you certainly won't see me dying on any hills trying to defend a particular shonen anime. You might say, hey, what you said doesn't and probably won't apply to every shonen that exists and will exist though. And while I agree that we shouldn't generalize, I've just been disappointed so much that I don't want to expect anything from these shows now. Sorry shonen fans, but I simply just don't care anymore. But of course, that's not me telling you to join me in my apathy. If you're someone that enjoys shonen just for the pretty fight scenes, hot men and women, and the sheer amount of hype that surrounds these shows, you should keep enjoying that to the fullest. In fact, let me know down in the comments why you love the shonen that you do. What I said in this video is purely my opinion, so don't let my point of view on shonen ruin yours. If you agreed with me or simply enjoyed listening to my perspective though, leave a like for me to help me out. And if you want more from me, subscribe to see more future videos. I also stream here on YouTube, so feel free to tune in my streams if you just want to chat and hang out. That's going to be it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!